In my opinion, once you get to the age of about 55 to 60 years old, that's when I would consider you getting into the elderly population stages of your life. I think one of the primary concerns as you get older is that people will tend to suffer from muscle loss or sarcopenia, which is as you get older, through age-related decline, you tend to lose muscle mass. Outside of that, you get things like a loss in balance and coordination as well, as a result of being less stable. So if you watch older people when they move and when they walk, as a result of getting older, things start to slow down, like substantially. And I think part of that is the brain kind of teaching them or telling them that it's important to do so. As you get older, the risk of falling down and getting hurt increases as well. And then finally, I think a big concern is your bone density tends to get worse as you get older as well. So these are some of the things that the elderly population should be wary about. And this is why strength training can help. Naturally, as you get older, things like chronic heart disease, diabetes or blood sugar management issues, and high cholesterol tend to become more prevalent. Now, it's not necessarily due to the lack of exercise, but as you get older, things like nutrition, sleep, and various other lifestyle factors, like whether or not you drink enough water or your day-to-day activity, these are things that become or seem to become less important as one gets older. And I think exercise just ends up being the catalyst for those things. So naturally, if you are exercising, people tend to be more mindful about all of those things. Now, as I mentioned earlier, as you get older, your bone density reduces and decreases, and your balance and coordination tends to suffer, which then means there's an increased likelihood of you falling down. Now, as you fall down, and if your bone density or your bones aren't strong enough, it means that the injury itself can be far worse, and the recovery time can take a lot longer. As a result of this happening, you may get physical sort of detriments where the elderly may not be able to do their day-to-day functions with ease. They may be bedridden, which means that their activity levels go down. Psychologically, there's this fear of getting hurt again. So perhaps when they do recover, they are less active as a result. So all of these things tend to cascade into further health issues as you get older, which is why strength training in the gym is extremely important. Before I talk about having personal training for adults, I think it's important to talk about the training itself. Strength training, first and foremost, will help reduce the degradation of muscle mass, or rather help maintain a certain level of muscle mass, as well as strength in the joints. Second, training itself will stimulate the bones. So the more stress you put on the body, the more stress you end up putting on your bones. And as a result, the density of your bones can then improve. So strength training in general, regardless of whether it's with a trainer or not, is going to have a huge impact on the elderly population. When your bones are stronger, your joints are stronger, your muscles are stronger, things start to be a bit more stable in the body. And as a result, the balance and coordination may improve, right? Although these are things that need to be practiced in isolation as well. But it means that in the event there is a fall or there is a injury, that your recovery ability improves from that as well. And as a result, the cascading events that may happen as a result of being inactive are less likely to happen. Now, personal training, in that sense, the trainers provide structure to the elderly in terms of how they can work out what they should be doing, what exercises they should be doing, how much weight they should be lifting, ensuring that it's done safely, first and foremost, because I think with training specifically, there's an abundance of information that's out there. And the older you get, the less you're going to be aware of whether or not something is specifically for you versus something that you see online and you just want to try and mimic. So I think having a personal trainer guide you is extremely important. And the cool thing about strength training or training in general is that specifically with weights, I think it's highly customizable. And the older you get, the more attention to detail I think is required when it comes to planning training programs or exercises for that population. So a personal trainer can help for sure. So when the elderly population seeks personal training, I think, at least in my experience, the number one goal for them is to improve their quality of life. So I haven't encountered anyone over the age of 60 that comes in and says, I want a six-pack. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not possible. Of course, these things become a lot more challenging as you get older due to the limitations that they may face. However, improving the quality of life seems to be the number one priority for everyone 60 and above. That then results, or rather it means improving mobility, improving flexibility, improving overall strength levels in the gym, because it then allows them to do their day-to-day tasks with a lot more ease, right? Or without feeling like they're unable to do it or not sure whether they should do something. Some people like to still go for runs as they get older. Some people like to cycle on the road. These are things that, as a result of getting stronger in the gym, you have a little bit more confidence to do as you get older. And then I guess on the other side of that, it's just ensuring that they don't have health issues such as diabetes, cholesterol issues, or hypertension. These are things that they would, if they were to have them, they would like to manage those things, or rather try and improve on those health markers. So these tend to be the two most important things that the elderly population seek when they enroll in personal training. So adapting an exercise program to the elderly is exactly the same as adapting an exercise program to someone who is 20 years old, right? So before we even give anyone a training program, it's important to assess what they can currently do. So we do a movement-based assessment where we look at basic movement patterns, such as a push movement, a pull movement, a squat movement or squat variation, and a hip hinge movement, for example. These are, if you want to call them, the big four in terms of day-to-day movements that one might do. So it's assessing what they can currently do, what it currently looks like, and whether or not they can actually control the movement based on the instruction we've given them. And then accordingly, because we're fortunate to have a gym where we have a variety of different equipment, we can then pick an exercise variation based on their ability and start there. I think the most important thing with the elderly versus someone who is 20 or 25 years old is putting them in a stable environment where we can focus on one thing, as opposed to having various external factors that may require them to spend a lot more time thinking about the exercise as opposed to doing the exercise. So I think the risks of exercising for the elderly population, again, is exactly the same as it would be for anyone. The risk is just higher for the elderly population because of things I mentioned before. Things like a lack of stability, poor balance and coordination, or motor ability. So these are things that we just have to be mindful of. If someone over the age of 60 comes in and sees us for personal training, but it doesn't mean that there's any different risks that we need to be mindful of. And as I mentioned, I think The most important thing is finding a stable environment, whether that's sitting down using a machine where there are less external things that we need to worry about, and focusing on the execution of the movement. And I guess for the elderly population, what would be important is to ensure that they are efficient with the movement first before we focus too much on increasing the load. Whereas that's something that we might focus on with someone much younger, focusing on load. I think for the elderly, doing more reps would probably see more benefit. So I have a client of my own personally. When she came to see me on day one, her only goal was to get movement function back in her arm. So prior to her coming to see me, she had surgery on her shoulder for torn rotator cuff. Her movement ability with both her arms, where her left arm goes over her head, but her right arm stopped here. And in order for her to get her right arm over her head, she had to support it and lift it up over her head. So we've been training for over a year now, and through a progressive strength training program, picking the right exercise variations and being very deliberate with her strength progression, she is now able to lift her arm over her head and actually do a full circle with her right arm without supporting her right arm with her left. So for her, she managed to achieve her goal of getting, I wouldn't say 100% of her mobility back in her right shoulder, but I would say we're 85% of the way there in terms of the mobility. And then the strength is something that will take a lot longer to catch up, but she's in a far better position now than she was when we first started. So the oldest client we currently have training with us at Surge is 70 years old. And why that's important is there was a stat that I read online that once you get to the age of 70, in the event there was an incident where you suffered a hip injury, whether it was a hip dislocation or fracture, there's a stat out there that says 8 to 10% of the people that suffer a hip injury, such as a dislocation or a fracture, die within the first month of that injury occurring. And up to 30% of the people that suffer that kind of injury die within 1 year. Now that's quite scary, because it just goes to show that the older you are, the more prone you are to these injuries. And with the bone density being a huge thing as you get older, and obviously the lack of muscle mass and strength in your joints and things of that nature, strength training can help reduce that significantly. So improving your recovery ability, as well as ensuring that in the event there is a fall, that risk of you suffering a serious injury comes down. I think there's a lot of value in strength training for the elderly population.